The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. So there's no stopping, there's no anything. No. Everyone's just going to be perfect this far away from the mic.
Oh my God,
Ben,
the pressure.
Trumpet distance from the mic.
The pressure.
Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome to Gone by Lunchtime. Here we are, very early on a Wednesday morning, and we're here to talk debate. Last night saw an important debate in the lead up to election 2020, just shy of 4 weeks out. What did you make of it, Annabelle?
It was an amazing debate. So, of course, the 3 candidates for Waiariki were in studio at TV3. Hannah Tamaki, leader of Vision New Zealand, Rawiri Waititi, the candidate for the Māori Party in Waiariki, and, of course, sitting MP Tamati Coffey. It was raucous, robust, really entertaining, interesting watch, and of course Mihi was absolutely on fire.
Henry Forbes is doing a whole series of debates, 7 indeed, for the Māori seats. I saw the first one, which was Tamiki Makaurau, and was really impressed by the calibre of the debate and the candidates. We had there was John Tamihere, who I thought did really well, sort of spiraled a bit towards the end, but basically was much more impressive than I saw him in the mayoral debates, I've got to say. And Marama Davidson, well, we know she's got a lot to offer, and she was strong. And then Penny Henare was really good as well, I thought.
Penny Henare was good, interestingly quite differential to John. Marama Davidson came in really hard on the pink recession issue and mana wahine, and how women are being overly impacted by COVID, and yet they hold the answers to solving issues in their community. Like you say, JT put in a really solid performance, was very popular online, was a little bit unravelled at the end when Mihi challenged him over foreshore and seabed. But the interesting pattern that I'm seeing in the debates is the way that the Māori Party when they're challenged about their track record during the last government, they kind of disavow themselves and say this is a whole new party, and then turn around and say, are we going to judge Labour on their track record, foreshore and seabed, housing crisis, 80s neoliberalism, the whole thing, and it's quite an effective strategy, and it makes for really interesting debates. Tonight, Ika Rōrāwhiti, make sure you tune in, 8 o'clock, online.
What about Te Tai Hauaru? That's the one I'm most excited about.
Te Tai Hauaru will be really interesting.
When are we seeing that?
With Debbie Ngārewa-Paka. So that is not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after.
Oh, okay, right. You're saving that up a bit.
Saving it for last.
So 8 days from now as we speak. Is that right? Or 7 days from now as we speak. Who knows what is time? I should say this has Gone by Lunchtime, which is a podcast politics, which is
the Wednesday
perhaps might have been mentioned a bit earlier if I'd recalled. And that's Annabelle Limatha. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
And Ben Thomas is over here too. Kia ora,
Hello,
Ben.
good morning.
Nice to see you. Very quickly, the Te Tai Hauaru remains the seat where, of all of the electorates in the country, where we're most likely to see a small party make their way in.
I think yes, I'd agree with that.
And
There's potential for flip. There's certainly of the 7 Māori electorates, it's the one where the result will be pretty tight, I imagine, either way.
And what do we think of Rawiri's chances in Waiariki?
Rawiri is an excellent candidate, and he stood
for
for
Labour
Labour in 2014, and he did really well, really, really well. So he's a strong candidate, no doubt about it. He's also JT's father-in-law, so he gets to draw from, his experience in mātauranga and stuff. He'll put in a good challenge. I'm not sure if he'll be able to flip it off Tamati. I dare say that Deb is in a slightly stronger position just because Adrian Rudawhi doesn't enjoy the same profile as Tamati does. But
do we think that Tamati's profile is good in general?
He looks amazing standing, and there was a Whakatane stand-up, and it was Kitty Allen and Tamati standing behind the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. They look incredibly cool. If that's what you mean.
To unseat Te Ururoa Flavel in Waiariki is no mean feat. So obviously he's well liked. But having said that, it's always a lot harder when you're the incumbent. Then you get judged on your track record in his case over the last 3 years, and let's be honest, it's not particularly glowing. It's when you're the challenger, you don't. It's all care and no responsibility. So it might be a bit tougher this time, but I certainly don't think he has a terrible profile.
My sense is that he was sort of driven to that victory in the last term. I think Meka Whaitiri, who was in Ikaroa Rāwhiti, was driving a really effective campaign against Tururoa's Te Tura Whenua Māori land reforms.
Very unpopular.
Yeah, and I think that Tamati Coffey, he kind of piggybacked on the back of that a little, even to the extent of having Meka Whaitiri actually turning up to a number of his meetings and debates and sort of basically taking the load of talking. I think that's a seat that I'll be watching with a lot of interest.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair too, it was a number of things. Māori were hoha with the Māori Party over their relationship with the National Party. Rotorua had a particularly bad homeless problem and still does. So I think it was a number of factors. Like you say, that Te Ture Whenua Māori bill was incredibly unpopular, and particularly in Waiariki, where there's a high level of Māori land ownership. So, and of course, Meka and all of those things. Tamati, who had an existing profile. So I think it was a number of factors.
Now, I want to say a big hello and thank you to Tina Tiller, who is making all of this work technologically and spiritually very much. I also want to acknowledge Flick, who support the spin-off politics section and are dear friends of ours, and I also want to thank members whose contributions to the spin-off allow us to do things like what we're doing now, which is we're unable to have an audience with us for this podcast as we normally do, owing to 2.5 restrictions. So instead, I am currently walking around the studio. I'll paint a picture for you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm walking around the studio with a clipboard. Ben Thomas and Annabelle Lee Mather are standing at podiums.
I'm beaming menacingly out at the cameras.
Yep. Meanwhile, Annabelle Lee Mather is looking very statesperson-like.
Standing on a highly polished floor.
Yes, very polished floor.
Like obsidian.
What we're doing, of course, is an homage to the leader debate, the first leader debate, which was held last night at TVNZ. I went along, and it was a slightly surreal business because the leaders only had 2 people allowed with them in the studio, and then there was John, who kind of snuck on through the wings, John Campbell, and so it was kind of unusual. And the media, normally you get to sort of sit in the smallish audience, but the audience feeds some of that energy. You have the adrenaline really going, and you feel like it's one of those things where they say you could cut the air with a knife or whatever you want to choose. Last night, it kind of felt a bit more flat to me somehow. I guess it's my kind of take on it, Ben, was that we're all just a bit exhausted. What did you make of it?
Well, Saturday, of course, marked the day when this should have all been over. That was when the election was originally scheduled for Yeah, I think that's right. People have been tired on the campaign trail. Every MP I've bumped into has been absolutely exhausted. They didn't, an election year, you plan to peak the same way that an athlete does, or a boxer in camp or whatever. And once you realise that there's another 4 weeks, something that may have been doable.
And you've run out of human growth hormone.
Yeah, and also your whole
the blood or stem cells of millennials. Did you think?
And you're running without your steroids in empty stadiums.
Every time Judith Collins talked about STEM last night, it sounded like as if she was about to say stem cells.
Right. They're really, she's very very much pushing the technology thing. But it was an interesting business, and there were
one word for you, John.
There
computers.
There was a lot of
computers. Computers.
I want to show you something. This is a smartphone.
Okay, boomer.
Goggle it.
Let's talk about women in STEM.
It was a bit like there was a border policy announced yesterday by Jerry Brownlee, most of which seemed to be, we're going to get an app.
Goggle it.
But it's a really tricky thing to negotiate a debate in these strange times. And Annabelle, you and I were speaking just before while we were waiting for Ben to show up. In fact, I think it was, wasn't it? We were talking about how it's kind of difficult to know how you slice and dice the subjects in debates, and that maybe what we might have had is one debate where you go, look, this is all COVID. This is all COVID and the economic recovery post-COVID. Let's just get into it because. I feel like it's tricky. Like, I should be ashamed of myself for saying this, but the COVID bits at the start, I felt a bit like I've heard so much about this already,
Yeah.
But of course, what are you going to do if you're producing that debate? You're not going to go, well, we're not going to do COVID because everyone's bored by COVID. Obviously, it's the most critical thing. So perhaps you might have organised the debates where one of the two that TVNZ had is like full on COVID and economy, like you got people in little kind of virus suits running around doing
PPE,
that sort of stuff, and then the other one are sort of some of the other more kind of typical issues.
Yeah, it's tough because an hour sounds like a lot, but it goes by so quickly, and when you break it down segment by segment, there's literally only 6 or 7 minutes in it, so they end up getting about 3.5 to 4 minutes in each part with VTs and intros and all that sort of stuff. I have seen some criticism online that tangata whenua Māori weren't mentioned at all during the debate. A lack of content or detail around the economy, and I sympathise because it's really difficult to try and squeeze every kaupapa in, and so I do, as we were talking about Toby, maybe if there's a debate for health, a debate for economics, a debate for COVID,
and it's one of the reasons some of those ministerial debates can sometimes be the most fruitful. Like, for example, when you get Winston Peters going down to his boot. There wasn't a debate. There was an interview, wasn't it? What do you make, Ben? There was some sort of suggestion in the lead up that Judith Collins, and we'll get to the poll in a second, that Judith Collins is going to have to kind of pull some crazy, fuming, fiery, high wire rabbit out of a hat, and take lots of risks. I wouldn't say she took lots of risks, but she did. She was the more energetic of the two people on the stage last night. Yeah,
she warmed up. She started with that sort of fixed, strained smile that she's been wearing since she became leader.
Yeah,
and was very much on this kind of amicable sort of tip. And as the debate wore on, she started making sort of asides and started niggling at Ardern, and really actually seemed to get under her skin quite a bit, I thought.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I saw that.
I didn't think that you've got to remember a lot of this is expectation management as well. The Collins camp would want you to think that Collins was really up against it coming into this debate, that she was doomed, that she had no chance, because then that lowers and lowers the threshold for what you need to do to be seen to have won it. You know, I mean, the best example of that obviously is Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, where, you know, he barely made sense in their first debate, and so people called that a win because they were ready for
Do you think that Judith Collins should have walked around behind Jacinda Ardern and sort of cast a shadow across her and looked like a...
No, but what I mean is that, you know, by holding her own, by appearing to be an equal of the Prime Minister, and I think probably getting the better of the exchanges, although pretty marginally, you know, that can only be good for her because, you know, again, once you look at the polls, you know, there's no comparison.
I don't feel like it's going to move the dial in any substantial way, though, you think, Annabelle?
Well, I think, you know, people say that being the leader of the opposition is the hardest job in politics.
It's upsetting. This is upsetting. This is real stuff. This is your show. It's great that you're showing. So I just want to say thank you for bringing the emotion.
Oh, I just feel it deep in my heart.
Yep.
But I think debates are one of the examples of where it's actually not great to be the incumbent. And I think Jacinda will be realising that it's really hard to sound fresh and enthusiastic and like this new movement when you're actually the incumbent and you're being measured against your performance. And it is one of the few times that the leaders of the opposition do have, you know, an advantage over the incumbent.
That's the key, right? Is that, you know, during 2017, her line was, you know, you've got a tunnel, we've got a vision. Right now,
exactly.
Kiwi Build remains a vision. Ending child poverty remains a vision, and so it's much harder as the incumbent.
And yet she goes into this election with a sky high support rate. The overall support in New Zealand for the response to the COVID crisis is in the 70s. And so, you know,
I don't
I
think
kind of
it'll
feel like
turn the dial, Toby, but I think what it does is it makes her most ardent supporters feel a little uninspired.
Yep. I mean, that's right. There were no right kind of rallying cries or kind of big vision statements. And that's been true, perhaps with the exception a bit of the crowd you get for the campaign launch and the enthusiasm there. That's the way they're playing it. They're like, don't rock the boat. Let's just keep getting there. And But as you said, Ben, we were meant to have had the election on Saturday. That's why it was kind of a big call to push it out by 4 weeks. But
this week we were all supposed to be sucking up to Winston Peters, weren't we? This is like the time every 3 years where we all kowtow.
Yeah, stand around outside the lifts in the Beehive, the gallery. Love that sort of thing. However, on the back of the poll that preceded, and the kind of, we now have this big kind of sugar hit before the debate itself. We had the poll at 6 p.m. It was the first poll in what seemed like several decades. The first kind of TV poll, because we're down to, for the public, the polls that people take most seriously, that are public, are the Colmar Brunton for TV NZ and the Reed Research for News Hub. And this poll came out, and it was 48% for Labour, 31% for National, 7% for ACT, who, as I understand it, that's not rogue. I think there are other polls. I hear there are other polls, and particularly internal ones, that might have them a little bit higher even than that.
I've heard they've gotten up to 9 before.
So it's kind of astonishing that, and perhaps we'll talk about that in a second. But it still would, on those numbers, give Labour enough to govern alone, and obviously it's a huge relief too for the Green Party. Who
I think Labour will be pretty happy with that, to have got through that second lockdown and the mishaps along the way. Still, on the face of it, being able to govern alone. It's fascinating to me that in the era of climate change, apparently more New Zealanders care about preserving their rights to own semi-automatic weapons than they do the environment. And that's kind of interesting, because so many of those people that have those sorts of weapons are kind of the hunter-fisher types who actually really care about the environment as well. So I think while the Greens will be like counting their lucky crystals that they're on 6%, it's kind of a fascinating insight into some of the attitudes in New Zealand at the moment. And I do wonder about, the influence of the US and social media and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I feel ACT's growth now, once they're getting up to 7%, possibly 8%, that's really disaffected National voters. That's people who think that National aren't being tough enough. It's coming from the right of National. They think that National aren't tough enough on debt, on keeping the border secure while also letting people in.
It's so confusing.
I think the gun lobby kind of topped out for them at about sort of 3-4%.
But it is an interesting point that that there is, well, it seems unlikely, there is a group of New Zealanders who may have moved from Green to ACT, because when you draw up the spectrum, one is at one and the other is the other. But they're, people who live in rural parts of New Zealand and are in touch with the land, as far as they're concerned, right?
I think
that's a vision from the past, Toby.
Is it?
Ben, I have to say
that's a time that's passed.
I don't know. I mean,
the words of Jacinda Ardern.
I know we've joked about it before on the show, Ben, but I do, in retrospect, with your far superior knowledge of reality television, have to say that I think you're right in terms of, ironically, the power of Dancing with the Stars, because it seems that he's captured a real youth vote as well, who think that he is so super cool.
I mean, I think it's absolutely right that most of it is carved off National vote, who are going, look at this shambles, where do I move? And it's all. I think there will be some people for whom moving to ACT can be like, well, I will express my dissatisfaction. But also, David Seymour has been an effective opposition. I think I might have said this before on the pod, but we remember the days when Russell Norman and Metiria Ture were, for a time, a more effective opposition than the Labour Party. Don't know if he ever quite reached that length, but David Seymour is, a very effective, and he's effective in select committees, he's effective in the House, and he mostly gets his head around subjects. So, I think we shouldn't overlook that among
He's
the other...
right-wing reincarnation of Jim Anderton circa 1990.
Wow.
1990, what,
wow,
6?
I can feel Jim Anderton rolling in his grave. That suggestion. And so in terms of the state of the National Party, of course, I mean, the weird thing about that poll, right, is that it finished polling on Monday afternoon, I think. And so it took in the return of national chaos, right? And so that's why we sort of wonder if a poll had been taken shortly after lockdown 2.0, that maybe National would have been a bit higher and Labour a bit lower, who knows? But that was, Ben, I mean, if you want to, anything is shovel ready, turns out it's fiscal holes. and to make an error of $4 billion, look, it all comes out in the wash, right? Like, these are all predictions, but all the same, in terms of you don't make a mistake like that.
Excuse me.
That's very embarrassing.
That's what happens when you put a Maori in charge of the economy.
That's right. So we need to stop all these settlements with Ngāti Epsom. That's the problem.
Look, I don't think it's not quite the same for a number of reasons as Stephen Joyce's $11.7 billion hole. First of all, because this was a genuine error, whereas...
Because it was a hole.
The Stephen Joyce allegation about Labour's fiscal hole was technically not right. Joyce just misread their sheets.
Well, it wasn't so much a hole as a kind of a pile of things. Yeah.
What he was talking about was there was a lack of what he pivoted to saying he meant after he realised he
how
just miscalculated.
He spun it was
that they had left a lack of fiscal headroom, which is actually the exact same thing that Labour are accusing National of in general in the selection. Goldsmith, put in the wrong figure, so he's $4 billion out. But really, the interesting thing about that is it makes almost no difference. You know, in terms of the sums that are being talked about, you know, since COVID, this, as Goldsmith said, this is the difference between ending up, you know, putatively at 36% of GDP in debt, as opposed to 35%. Labour is still aiming at 48%.
And that's all true, but also not the point, is it? I mean, it's not a trivial amount of money, and basically, at a certain point, you know, on the day of the campaign launch, for that to emerge and for that to be the story that sucks all the air out of your campaign launch at Avalon, and it almost looks like they're going through the, you know, those slogans that were on the signs. They're not like a checklist. You just say, well, cross that one off. We'll cross that one. Strong team. Done. All right, what's next? Economy. Let's go, you know? I mean, it's
what's the last one left? It's like your future.
Well, no, they've changed. No, it's jobs. No, the jobs was the other one. So they've still
the new one, which is
the new one. Well, this is the thing.
They've
They've kind of quietly introduced a new slogan, which is your economy, your future.
Yeah,
I think so. They've quietly kind of retired the strong team. But I mean, it's just.
They reached an amicable
settlement. I felt sorry for Judith Collins going out onto the stage, and they had that I quite enjoyed the virtual campaign. Sort of had a little bit of a kind of nostalgic top-town telethon type feel to it. You know, they went around till. Did you watch it, Ben?
I did. I thought.
Did you like that bit?
It was a strange sort of format. You know, where they were. It was very mannered. I don't know that Judith Collins' strength is talking to a camera with nothing behind it. You know, we saw that in the debate. We also saw that.
Yeah, there were some of those forced grins that you talked about before that felt a little bit like, why did you smile then?
Yeah, and you know, in the debate, Collins seemed a lot happier when she was basically sort of interjecting on Ardern and interacting with a human.
Yeah.
I don't think people realise how hard that stuff is, though. Like, when you're trying to interact with the camera and you're getting no human response, no clapping, there's no body language to read or play off, or no warm sounds emanating from the audience, you know.
We're finding that now, in fact. Really, you're finding that now with me promenading around the studio, aren't you?
Very much so. But just coming back to Pauda, you know, the thing is that it just... Is it a big deal at the end of the day? I mean, to me, $4 billion sounds like a whole shit ton of money. It may not have like a super real impact on the economy, but it just buggers their credibility and what is supposed to be their sweet spot. They're supposed to be the money guys, the business guys, the guys who know all their timetables all the way up to like 13. And now they don't. Apparently they don't.
13 times 13, Ben? 169.
I was going to say 130. No.
Well, that's 144. It's 12. 12 is 144.
Yeah, it's 169.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good number.
This has gone by lunchtime, ladies and gentlemen. We should mention, of course, that the conversation they would have liked us to be having on Sunday during campaign launch about the tax cuts, which was a surprise and was a change after the National Party had said there would be no tax cuts. Suddenly, tax cuts, 16 months of them, focused on middle earners. Not so great if you're a supermarket worker, pretty good if you're a kind of in the earning 80, 90k a year. Did that surprise you, Ben? That was... we were talking in the last pod about the gravitation towards the centre and everyone was much the same. That was the first thing. It was followed, I should say, I think on the Saturday by the Labour Party pledging to push the minimum wage up to $20, excuse me, and to extend the sick leave entitlement. By a week, I mean, and so it felt like there was some
already scheduled.
Sure, but National aren't going to do it. I mean, so it's a different. My point is that after feeling like everything was getting quite samey, we're starting to get some differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's never. You should probably never be that surprised when National offer tax cuts at an election. That's one of those paradoxical surprises where you're like. if you'd asked somebody 6 months ago or a year ago, they would have been like, of course, National are going to have tax cuts in the election. They're saying that it's a stimulus because it's only for a 16-month period. That's perfectly respectable Keynesian economics. The government's line has been that this is really irresponsible because of the deficits, and that the government is going to be taxing a little bit more to pay down debt, whereas National's giving it all away in tax cuts, which is absolutely ridiculous, of course, because as we've already talked about, National's plan, is billions and billions of dollars less borrowing than Labour's plan. Now, both of these are just plans and will be totally blown off course by all the things that happen in the next 10 years. But there is a real, ordinarily when the goal for both parties is to get a zero budget or a surplus budget, you can make a direct link between, you're doing tax cuts or you're making these spending promises and that's having an effect on the debt or your ability to meet surplus. That link has been utterly broken because of the amounts that have already been borrowed now and that are being borrowed in the future. There's, for instance, saying that, National miscalculated their budget by $4 billion, which means they can't afford their $4 billion tax cuts, is, just doesn't really hold up, right? Because there's essentially an infinite limit for borrowing, and same goes for for Labour. The interesting thing is Labour have chosen to put those burdens on the private sector in terms of minimum wage increases and sick leave allowances. So they're not promising as much, from quotation marks, their own money as a government.
Except that the most effective stimulus, I think it's empirically shown, is when you provide that stimulus into the pockets of the lowest earners who go out and spend that money and put it back. And we talked about this last week, I think, that if you're providing a tax cut to substantially into the pockets of middle and middle higher earners, that's going to go into, guess what? Houses, for God's sake.
Well, no, because on current interest rates, anybody who's already owns a house would be mad to put their own money into a house instead of just leveraging against existing houses, right? I mean, basically, you're making money by borrowing. So nobody's going to be like saving up and penny pinching to, the rich boomers aren't going to be putting aside, their $50 a week for a deposit on a house. They're going like leverage it against the batch, get 2 apartments in town.
And spend the money on doing up the house next door that they buy and then rent out at extortionate rates. Yeah.
It feels like Labour has missed the opportunity to enact some of the transformational change they talked about. Newsroom did an interesting article this week about how families are again going to be charged for emergency housing. Now, back in 2016, when they were still in opposition, Carmel Sepuloni came on the hui and said that not only would families not be charged for emergency housing, they wouldn't be expected to pay back their debts that they'd incurred. I was going to say accrued, and then I just had a little
saying that over Annabelle
and
at the end of her
then
sentence.
it all short-circuited, and then I needed a Control-Alt-Delete, and then
everyone will go,
I needed
typical Ben talking over Annabelle again.
And that they wouldn't have to pay those back to win. So I think, COVID represented an opportunity, I think, to really make some big changes when it comes to the benefit system. And the challenge always with making changes to the benefit system is the amount of resentment it causes. But I think with COVID, there was a softening, and you probably could have made some big changes, and they've chosen not to do that. That would have been a great way of stimulating the economy as well, getting more money into the hands of the most vulnerable New Zealanders who are even more vulnerable now.
I'll tell you another way to stimulate the economy is to log on to spinoff.co.nz and check out the Gone by Lunchtime tea towels, which are available at $20 a pop and feature your friends from Gone by Lunchtime and a cast of other characters.
That money goes straight into Annabelle's drinking account. So
the
velocity of circulation is incredible.
Very quickly, because I've got to go, the Auckland Central poll from News Hub Nation came out on Saturday morning, and it showed what the National candidate Emma Mallow and the Green candidate Chloe Swarbrick called a three-horse race. But Helen White was kind of reasonably comfortably out ahead. An interesting Reid poll, which they had managed to they accumulated from 4 different sources, namely landlines, mobile phones, online, and in person, sitting outside the New World in Victoria Park. Anyway, Chloe Swarbrick came third in that poll, and you feel as though if she'd just come second, that she might have had a shout, the Green candidate. Well, it would be great for the Greens, especially if they're not absolutely certain of getting over the 5%. Even if she'd come, even at that distance, if she'd managed to come ahead of Emma Mallow, that she could make a case that she was second, the Green candidate second. But now it seems like a hell of a steep climb for her to be in that race. Annabelle.
Very, very steep climb for Chloe, which is a shame because she's a remarkable young candidate. I think it's a real testimony to Nikki Kaye and what an incredible candidate she was.
Yep.
And you could say, look, she's just riding off Jacinda Ardern's popularity, but actually, she's done something that a lot of other politicians would love to do, and beaten Jacinda 3 times in that seat.
Yeah,
so I think it goes to show
and
what a great campaigner and candidate
and
Nikki
matched
was.
her. I mean, when you back in the day, when we were all young and watching those Auckland Central debates, you wouldn't have said, well, obviously that Labour candidate Jacinta, what's her name, is better than that other candidate Nicola. And so Nikki Kaye has now sailed off into a new life, and good luck to her. Ben, do you think that Chloe Swarbrick could yet pull something off?
The Greens were in very fast and I thought quite good spin mode afterwards, talking about how because Emma Mallow was so far behind, yet at the same time Chloe was so very close, that showed that there was no risk of vote splitting on the left, and that all of those people who had, the 40% of people who had been intending to vote Helen White just for safety could all do what they really wanted to do and come over and vote Chloe now. Which, I mean, I thought was, that's a good effort to come up with quickly.
Yeah.
And look, the logic holds true, Helen White will be in Parliament anyway. Emma Mallow looks like she won't be in Parliament, whatever happens. And if the Greens number hold up over 6, then Chloe will be in Parliament because she's number 2. I mean, I suppose the only, and I think that you can just vote for whoever you really want as the candidate. So what we're saying to you, listeners, our advice is vote for whoever you want. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back again in a week. You can follow us, like us, subscribe us, or do all those things on your favourite podcast platform. Thanks again, Tina. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Ben. We'll catch up next week.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.